All right, hello everybody. Welcome to History of Money. Professor Barth here, history professor at Arizona State University. Lecture number 23. I have to say, this is one of my favorite lectures of the semester. Maybe my favorite, because I'll tell you what, this story of the Bank War in the 1830s, Andrew Jackson versus Henry Clay and Nicholas Biddle, is one of the most exciting episodes in all of monetary history, in my view, and especially in U.S. monetary history. It's a drama, and I have to say, I'm just really excited about this lecture. For the first part, Part A, we're going to introduce the cast of characters in the political realm. We're going to take a look at two competing parties, and especially two competing men, Henry Clay versus Andrew Jackson. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. There is the American flag right at the beginning of the 1820s. Beautiful, beautiful flag. There is the United States and all the territory out west, not yet organized into states, but we see the east of the Mississippi River, things have, for the most part, taken shape. Well, in the 1820s, we have the emergence of what historians call the second party system, the second American party system. And without going into too much detail, the two parties are the Whigs and the Democrats. Now, the Whigs assumed the Hamiltonian mantle of a stronger, more active role for the federal government. Their interpretation of the Constitution, like Hamilton, is a lot broader, leaving for more flexibility for the federal government to act and to do various activities. For example, the Whigs support a protective tariff, a tariff designed not to raise revenue per se, although it has that effect, but primarily to protect American industry, primarily up north. Democrats, who represent the old Jeffersonian wing and have a much more limited view of the federal government's powers, they interpret the Constitution much more to the letter, oppose the protective tariff. They argued that there's nothing in the Constitution giving the government permission to do something like that, to intervene in the economy in that way. Whigs also support using federal dollars, federal funds, in order to finance the building of infrastructure projects like roads and canals, bridges. Democrats say, no, that's unconstitutional. There's nothing in the Constitution giving Congress the power to do something like that. But for our purposes, there is another policy question on which they differ, and that is on the question of the Bank of the United States. And the man leading the charge for the Whig Party and leading the charge on rechartering the Bank of the United States is none other than Henry Clay. Henry Clay, one of the most important statesmen in the history of American politics. Henry Clay is a great example of a man who never became president, and yet his political importance in American history vastly exceeds many men who actually were elected president. Henry Clay was born in 1777, illustrious career in the Congress. He was born in Virginia, but at age 20 he moved to Kentucky, established a flourishing law or legal career, and then became a plantation owner. Had a tobacco and hemp plantation, 600 acres with 60 slaves. He represented the West, and Henry Clay, again, an illustrious career in the House and the Senate. He served 3 non-consecutive terms as Speaker of the House. He helped to elect John Quincy Adams in 1824 to become President of the United States, and in turn was made Secretary of State. He serves 4 separate terms in the Senate. He ran for president 5 times. 3 of those times he got the nomination. 2 other times he didn't get the nomination, but 3 of those times he got the Whig Party nomination and lost the election. But massively influential, and he designed this policy program which he called the American system. The American system. And the American system supported protective tariffs for American industry, supported federal dollars for infrastructure projects, and supported rechartering the Bank of the United States. Now, Clay was a lot different from Hamilton. Hamilton was thoroughly elitist and unapologetic about it. Hamilton did not necessarily bother trying to convince the common man, right, common farmers, to get behind his deal. He assumed they would side with Jefferson. Clay reaches out to that portion of the public. Clay seeks to win out the farming interests. He wants to win the West for this vision. He convinces farmers, hey, look, you will really benefit from federally constructed roads. You'll benefit from a banking system that can extend credit. And so Henry Clay represents this view. And there was other big leaders of the party. Daniel Webster was another. He was a man born in New Hampshire, but then moved to Massachusetts. A giant there in the Senate, also served in the House of Representatives, but especially in the Senate. He was Secretary of State on 2 different occasions. Ran for the Whig Party nomination for president 3 times, but lost all 3 of those times. But regarded as one of the greatest orators in the history of the Senate. Unlike Clay, he was not too concerned with appealing to a common man. He was elitist and reveled in it in many ways. But brilliant man. He is also part of the Whig Party. And then there's this man. Andrew Jackson. 6'1", tall, skinny, actually, very lean. I think it was a better way to maybe frame it. Big bushy eyebrows. Look at those eyebrows. Large forehead with his hair brushed back, high above it. Piercing blue eyes. A captivating figure. Hot-tempered. A bit stubborn. Not afraid to buck the system. A remarkable man. A once-in-a-lifetime type of politician once he gets involved in politics. Andrew Jackson was born in Waxhaw, North Carolina, to a very poor Scotch-Irish family in 1767. He was only 9 years old when the U.S. declared independence from Great Britain. He joined the militia as a messenger when he was only 13 years old. And there he is right there, young Andy. And in 1781, he was captured by the British. One of the officers, pictured here, demanded that young Andy clean his boots. Andy refused, and so the British officer slashed him with the sword, leaving him permanent scars on his left hand and on his head. Young Andy's mother died when he was 14 years old, just a year later. His father, I neglected to note, his father had died 3 weeks before he was born, and so when his mother died when he was 14, he was essentially, he was parentless. And Andy left the war with an intense hatred for the British. Andy was a bit of an unusual figure for the time compared to other politicians of that era. He had only a very, very sparse education. When he was growing up, he was more interested in brawls and cockfighting than he was in reading. And even as an adult, he was known to occasionally misspell a word in his written speeches. And he wasn't the first president to not have a college education. George Washington didn't have a college education, nor was he the last. Abraham Lincoln didn't have a college education. Harry Truman also didn't have a college education. But that's where he's coming from, and it allowed Andrew Jackson, when he was older, it sort of allowed him to continue to relate to the common people, to the common man, even after he became quite successful and quite wealthy. Andrew moved out to Tennessee, was one of the founding frontiersmen of Tennessee, moved up the ranks, actually served in politics for a bit, including national politics in Tennessee. Then he was elevated to commander of the Tennessee militia and had some success there. One side story, in 1806, a man insulted his marriage. I won't go into all the details of that, but Andrew challenged him to a duel, allowed the man to have the first shot. The man shot his pistol, hit Andy in the chest. He stumbled back, collected himself, took his pistol, and shot the man and killed him. Andrew survived, of course. Andrew had, like I said, had a lot of success in the militia and then accepted a commission as Major General in the U.S. Army in 1814. By this point, he was becoming nationally known. He fought the Creek Indians with much success around this time period. And then in 1815, in January, he defeated the British handily, just spanked the British at the Battle of New Orleans, a remarkable victory against the British. And this made him somewhat of a celebrity. But by this point, he is no longer the lower class boy that he grew up. He is quite wealthy. In fact, in 1804, he established a plantation called the Hermitage, which is right outside of Nashville. Started out with 9 slaves. By 1820, he had 44 slaves, and then by the 1830s, at its peak, he had 150 slaves. And so this is a very wealthy man. And of course, you can visit the Hermitage today. And yet, again, he always retained that connection to lower class, kind of poor white folk, especially on the frontier. He understood them. He knew them. He related to them. He had great empathy for them. And they had great admiration for Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson was extremely charismatic. To a level, his critics labeled him a demagogue, but larger-than-life personality. You could call him a frontier aristocrat of sorts. We would say today a blue-collar millionaire. He was a folk hero, and again, he related to the common man. If Thomas Jefferson was an intellectual, right, Jackson was absolutely the polar opposite. Jackson is not an intellectual. Jackson is a populist. And what is populism? So it's a word that we hear thrown up around a lot today. Populism is it can manifest on both the left and the right and everything in between. Populism is a style of politics, and it's a style of politics that pits the people, right, or purports to pit the people against the establishment, against the elites. And Jackson is very, very successful at this and captures that political spirit, the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times, manifests in the person of Andrew Jackson. This is a famous painting from, I think, the 1850s, but it illustrates a county election. And here we see sort of the culture, the democratic culture of the day. And what do we see here? Of course, these are all white males, and for many people, the first instinct is, well, that's a very restricted franchise, and by our standards, it absolutely is. But for the 1830s, the 1820s and 1830s, actually, the United States had the most liberal franchise of anywhere in the world, in that there were no property qualifications whatsoever for voting. And so in places in Europe, in Britain, very few adult men were able to vote. But in the United States, no property qualifications. And so what it led to was a culture, a democratic culture in the United States that was quite unique, highly individualistic. And here we see everything. I mean, it's a bit of an anarchic scene here. You see the man here hungover, drinks being passed around, dogs running around, maybe some bribes going on. What a scene. And this is Jackson's base, right? I mean, this is who Jackson, he gets his energy from it. And these are, oftentimes, these sort of men are behind Jackson. Now, Clay, I said oftentimes because Clay actually does manage to capture some of this as well for his program. And so that's the competition. Who's going to win this vote? Is it going to be Jackson or Clay? And Clay really thinks that he can get this vote. Both men are from the West. Jackson from Tennessee, Clay from Kentucky. Who will capture his vote? And of course, it is Jackson. Jackson is the epitome of that democratic age. I love this cartoon. This is from Punch magazine, a British magazine from around the period. Life in an American Hotel. Life in an American Hotel. And what do we see here? There's the British gentleman, and he's traveling through America. He's at a hotel, and the Jacksonian Democrat points a pistol at him, pass the mustard. And the British gentleman just shocked at the at the man's, at the gall of this man, and just, what have I gotten myself into? This is Jacksonian culture, a caricature, obviously. Jackson runs for president in 1828. He actually ran for president in 1824, won the popular vote, but wasn't able to win the Electoral College. That's a whole different story. This time, though, in 1828, he runs and wins a smashing victory. Received 56% of the popular vote and 68% of the electoral vote. And so now, Jackson has been elected President of the United States, this hardcore Democrat. And he was, just through and through. But I don't want to get too off topic, but Jackson argued that Supreme Court justices should be made to stand for election. He argued against the Electoral College and said we should go only for a popular vote. He argued for a single-term presidency and other democratic reforms. But now he's been elected president. Inauguration Day, March 4th, 1829. He took a 3-week journey from Nashville to Washington. First by steamboat to Pittsburgh, and then by carriage from Pittsburgh to Washington, D.C. Large crowds greeted him along the way. And then a crowd of about 21,000 people. This had never been done before. A crowd of about 21,000 people came to see the swearing in. Then the White House was opened up. The doors were opened up for a post-inaugural reception. And the scene was chaotic. The public filled the White House. Several $1,000s of broken china. The White House was left a complete mess until someone finally had the idea, let's put a bowl of spike punch out on the White House lawn to entice everybody out of the house, and it worked. But it consists of shopkeepers and grimy, wage workers, and this was Jackson's base, and critics were appalled by the scene. Oh my gosh, this is what's happening, and they nicknamed Jackson King Mob. In fact, his predecessor, John Quincy Adams, refused to attend the inauguration. And so, there he is. He's become president, sworn in March 1829. What's he going to do? We will find out for Part B. See you there.